We have a very interesting session coming up, folks. I know we had a long day. We talked a lot about AI and how AI can help business, supply chain, this and that, but we're going to switch gear now. And we're going to talk about something that touches everyone's life, no matter what we do, what our profession is, what kind of technology we're involved with, irrespective of that. And what is that? It's about our health. And more than that, it's trying to answer this intriguing question of how can we live longer? Or maybe put the question in a different way, how to stay young? So no matter how you look at it, let's get our next fireside chat speakers here to unpack this question. To help us do that, let me first call up the moderator of that our session, which is not only a biotech industry veteran, but he's also an avid investor. He's a partner at Artiman Ventures. He's a CEO. He was the CEO of BioImagine, which was acquired by Roche. He's the former CEO of Siemens Oncology. He's an adjunct professor at Stanford School of Medicine and board member of multiple companies in the life sciences space. Please welcome my good friend and an alumni of IIT BHU, Dr. Ajit Singh. And Ajit will be joined by two experts in this field of anti-aging and longevity. Let me call them up on stage, and Ajit will drill down on them with more detail as to what they have been working on and how they can help us answering that esoteric questions of how do we live longer. Let me first call up Dr. Geeta Narlikar, who is a professor at UCSF. She was also, listen to this, she was elected member of National Academy of Sciences in 2021. She is an IIT Bombay alumni. And let me try to read something that says what her research area of interest is. Let's see if you guys get it. Her research areas are around the topics of epigenetic regulation and genome organization. And she's particularly interested in figuring out how nanoscale molecular motors make use of chemical energy to mechanically disrupt the genome. Any idea what I'm talking about? We will have after this session. So Geeta, please welcome. Next up, Dr. Ronjon, who is not only an inventor, but also an avid entrepreneur. He's the founder of R42 Institute, whose motto is invent, inform, and invest. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. He's an adjunct professor of genetics at Stanford School of Medicine. He won the 2021 IEEE SCV Outstanding Engineer Award, and he's also a co-founder at superbio.ai. Please welcome Dr. Ronjon. So Ajit, Sergi, your stage is yours.
Thank you.
Yep.
So let me kind of structure this conversation. I'll introduce my two co-panelists and kind of give a structure to this conversation. Hopefully I'll accomplish that in less than 5 minutes. And then I'll invite Geeta and Ronjon in that order to spend maybe 5-6 minutes each, and then we'll launch into questions. Okay? So I'll begin with, in the opposite order. Let me start with Ronjon. Ronjon studied communications and electronics engineering at University of Birmingham, came to MIT for his master's, went back to University of Cambridge for his PhD, and already in the 90s was working on using neural networks for mobile and communication technologies. So he worked with Amar Gupta, if I remember correctly.
Yes, actually in the 80s.
At MIT?
Neural networks.
Oh, neural networks, of course, indeed, absolutely. And then with Rumelhart as well.
Rumelhart,
at Stanford. Yeah. So the early pioneers, if you will. And the first company was Lexicus, that was acquired by Motorola in the 93 timeframe, late 93. Then his second company, Cellmania, was acquired by Research in Motion. Does the name ring a bell to people? RIM, yes, BlackBerry users. So, and through that, Ronjon ended up working for Motorola and BlackBerry briefly and managed to get fired from both of them in the right manner, as it should be. Ronjon is my colleague at Stanford, also an adjunct professor in School of Medicine, teaches genetics, and has created this company, investment company, R42, that invests in AI and longevity technologies, has been a winner of many awards. Most recently, last week, CogX gave you the Lifetime Achievement Award in front of, 90,000 people, so big hand of applause. How did we meet? We met at the audition for a film. Go figure. There was a film on longevity technologies at a rooftop being shot somewhere in Mountain View where we met first. That was many years ago, and I'm glad since then we've had a chance to work together. Let me switch my focus to Professor Geeta Narlikar. Geeta went to IIT Bombay, studied chemistry, came to the US to do her graduate work at Stanford, much work on RNA folding and the underlying mechanisms for biological catalysis. Went to Harvard Medical School to do your business school. Why do I say that? Why would
Freudian slip.
Freudian, exactly right, yeah. Went to Harvard Medical School to do postdoc, came back to the West Coast to be a professor in School of Biochemistry and Biophysics in the School of Medicine at UCSF, and has been since working on these cellular mechanisms of aging, about which we'll talk some. Has had a prolific career in terms of external validations and recognitions. So I think 2006, you got the Beckman Award for a young investigator. 2011, you were named an outstanding faculty at UCSF. 2018, you won that Glenn Award for biological basis of aging. And then most recently, 2021, really a big deal, Fellow of the National Academy of Sciences. That is a big deal. Big hand of applause. Unbeknown to Geeta, I enjoy a very special relationship with her through her father. If the name Jayant Narlikar rings a bell to some of you, he was a professor of he headed up astrophysics at TIFR, the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. When I joined ITBHU, 1980, there was one permanent fixture, which is the postman or the mailman that used to come and deliver mail. And that mailman had been there for some 40-odd years, and he was a repository of this very important piece of knowledge, which is who all were the distinguished people who stayed in the same room as a person now at the hostel. So in Morvi Hostel Room 229, he mentioned two people. One was Dr. Bhushan, I forget his last name, at IIT Kanpur, mechanical engineering professor, and the other was Professor Jayant Narlikar. So of course I felt really proud, somehow like I have inherited something really big. And my classmate Vinay Rai and I wrote a letter to Professor Narlikar saying we've come up with a new approach to calculate the nth root of any number iteratively. And he gave a very polite response, son, that's called the Newton-Raphson method.
Right.
But nevertheless, he was very kind to respond, and I was just talking to Geeta. He's doing well and cognitively very active and all of that. So I have these two very esteemed colleagues here. Let me kind of frame and structure this conversation in less than 3 minutes. Ayurveda rings a bell to everyone? Ayurveda, right? Yeah, Ayurveda. So what's the etymology of Ayurveda? How many have studied Sanskrit in high school? So sandhi vichhed karna aata hai aapko? Right? Yeah. So the Ayu is life and Ved is knowledge. So it's the science or knowledge of life. And Ayu, we also use the word age. So Ayu and Ayu, they are very related words, and Ayurveda is both science of life and science of age. So it's a concept that's been around for many thousand years with us. Do you know of any life form which lives forever, which is immortal?
The Hydra.
Say again? Yes, jellyfish. At least one species of jellyfish in some form, as in through a cycle where they go back to a certain form of life, do live. How about lobsters? Lobsters technically can live forever. Had it not been for the shell, they can live forever. They keep growing. They have this endless supply of telomerase. It's not, this is a first order approximation. It's not an entirely scientifically correct statement. However, at some point they get too big for their shells and they can't grow anymore. And now the idea of molting a shell and growing a new shell will take a lot of energy. A lot of ATP and mitochondria will be lost in the process, so they eventually die. So although the notion and science of longevity was not born by us observing jellyfish or hydra or lobster for that matter, if I structure, there are really 4 categories in my taxonomy. One is longevity, which depends on, obviously, genetics, lifestyle, and environment. And genetics, genes like APOE and FOXO3 and something called the DNA 1578, by which Japanese people live very long. Again, I'm oversimplifying. It's a first order approximation. So genetics, lifestyle, environment. That's longevity, to live long. Then there's the healthy life. That's another form of longevity, that how much ever long I live, I should live healthy. That's also genetics, lifestyle, and environment. Third part of the taxonomy is youthful living. I want to live long, short, I don't care, but I want to live youthfully as long as I live. Okay? Also genetics, environment, and lifestyle. And then there is fourth part of the taxonomy, which is prostheses of some sort to compensate for either decay or degradation. So the prostheses we know very well of is tooth implants, for example, hearing aids, glasses, contact lenses, knee replacements, hip replacements. Over time, we'll see more of the kind where you have, for example, a prosthesis that gives you some additional support, for example, in your calves through a pneumatic process, for instance, that allows you to effectively reduce your weight as you're going up a mountain or going up the steps. You could have brain implants for potentially dealing with Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, anxiety, insomnia, you name it. So this is a very arbitrary taxonomy. It's not a very scientifically sound taxonomy, but when we speak of longevity, we should be thinking of these 4 things in somewhat related but very different light. So with that sort of basis, I'm going to invite, to start with Geeta, yourself, to tell us kind of your big picture view, the big idea, if you will, in terms of cellular mechanisms of aging, and then what all are you working on?
First of all, thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this panel. It's a very different kind of discussion than I'm normally used to, so it's great. And thank you, Ajit, for that really kind introduction. That was very kind. Before going into opportunities or big ideas, I want to see whether we can have some shared understanding of what we mean by aging, and from the biological perspective. And so one way to think about aging is that it's an inevitable consequence of being a human organism on this earth. What do I mean by that? So the longer you're on this earth, the longer life that you have, the more chances there are for the cells in your bodies, the cells in your heart, in your brain, in your gut, to get damaged. Okay. How do they get damaged? Well, there are many different ways they can get damaged. One way they can get damaged is familiar to all of you: UV, external chemicals, things that you experience in the environment. That's one source of damage to your cells. And this damage is progressive, it's cumulative, it accumulates over your lifespan, right? But there's another source of damage that is intrinsic to the way the body functions. It's intrinsic to how the cells themselves function. So many of you hopefully know what a cell is. It's something you learned in basic biology. But one way to conceptualize a cell is like a very fancy bioreactor, right? It's doing a lot of complicated reactions, right? And it's kind of communicating with nearby cells. It's running different chemical reactions. And it's great at it. It's wonderful. Without having the cellular machinery, we wouldn't be alive. But it's not perfect, right? It's by no means perfect. These machines make mistakes. they accumulate toxic byproducts. And the longer you run these machines, the more toxic byproducts you accumulate, and they start damaging the very machinery that gives you life. And you can imagine, this is a clever crowd, right? You're all from IIT, so you can use your imagination to think, hey, if this damage is cumulative, there is going to be negative feedback, right? You start damaging a machine, it gets worse, it starts producing more toxic byproducts. And this kind of damage can then extend to damaging what you might call the source code of your cells, which is the DNA, right? All of you know that the DNA in your cells drives the identity of a cell, right? It has the instruction manual for what makes a nerve cell, a stomach cell, a stomach cell. When you start damaging the DNA, you start making mutations. And there you go, you start having this negative feedback loop, right? So again, one way to conceptualize aging is that it's inevitable, right? Sounds depressing. It's inevitable. It's inevitable because these cumulative series of damaging effects is going to keep happening, right? And so if I paint a picture like this, perhaps it's not difficult to imagine that you can't have some kind of fountain of youth magic potion that you can drink and reverse all of these different kinds of damages that happen all over your body, right? That is not realistic, right? What is realistic then? Right? So let's think about this, again, a little bit from first principles without using jargon as much as possible. What happens when a cell is damaged? Cumulatively over time. Early on, it can be repaired, right? There are repair machineries but the more damage you put in, the harder it gets to repair. Like anything in society, right? The more beating your car takes, the harder it gets to repair. The more beating society takes, the harder it takes to repair, right? And so when you reach some kind of threshold, you can have neurodegenerative diseases if your neurons in your brain can no longer sustain the damage. They stop making the electrical connections with their nearby neuron friends, right? And you get things like dementia, Alzheimer's, and so on, right? Again, it's age-related. On the other hand, if you damage the DNA sufficiently, you can make the cell have an identity crisis, right? So damage the DNA in your stomach cells, it no longer knows that it's a stomach cell because the instruction set has been messed up. The instruction set for what makes a stomach cell has been messed up. So now it is much more prone to becoming cancer-like. So now we have disease, right? Now, starting from aging, we have disease. And so here's where there's a lot of debate that this is the opportunity. The opportunity is if we can understand how aging relates to diseases like cancer and neurodegeneration, then we can treat these diseases not just as individual diseases like cancer and neurodegeneration, but as a consequence that collaborates with aging. And there are a lot of smart people, not me, other smart people, who are doing a lot of fundamental research on understanding mechanisms of neurodegeneration, how they relate to aging, cancer, how it relates to aging. And to me, that's where some of the really big opportunities are. Because if you can mitigate these diseases, which I'm sure have affected all of us in this room, one way or the other. I'm sure every one of you can name somebody who's had cancer in their lives or neurodegeneration. Right? So if you can mitigate that, and there is hope because basic scientists are working on it, then I think what Ajit was saying, right? Can you live long but healthily? That will become possible. Right? So that's where I think the real opportunities are because there's a lot of really good fundamental science that has gone into understanding the relationship between aging and cancer, aging and neurodegeneration. Okay, so that's my view of aging. What do we do? Okay, we don't study aging directly, right? But we study processes that are very, very fundamental to how a cell functions. And this is what Arnav was reading out. He was reading out some terms, and I was smiling because those are terms from my website, and they were written for biologists. And so I will try to re-say those terms for non-biologists. So what we study is how the DNA in your cells is regulated. What do I mean by that? If you take the DNA in any one of your cells and stretch it end to end, many of you may know this, it is 2 meters long, okay? As long as Amitabh Bachchan, right? But that long piece of DNA has to fit into a cell that is 1/100th the width of your hair, okay? So what that means is this thin, long thread of DNA is compacted, wrapped up, folded up, and fit into a small cell. So what does that do? That creates an opportunity for biology, right? Because think of DNA as a long instruction manual, A, T, G, C. If you're computer people, it's the code. It's the code behind the cell, right? How do you read the code, right? You can only read the code in a biological context if that code is accessible, if you can see it, if the machinery that reads the code can see it. But if you hide part of the code, you can't read it. So that's where we come in. We study how parts of the DNA are packaged and hidden away, and other parts are opened, and the machines that make the opening and closing possible. And so what that means is a nerve cell will have one part of its DNA shut off, so it behaves like a nerve cell, and it has another part of its DNA open and turns on the genes that make a nerve cell a nerve cell. A stomach cell will have a completely different set of its DNA pieces open and a completely different set of DNA pieces that are closed. Okay? And when this process goes wrong, when a stomach cell gene is expressed in the wrong place, that cell has an identity crisis. So how you package the DNA is critical for cell identity. That's what we study. We study the biochemistry, the biophysics of that process. And we also study what happens when that process goes wrong to give you diseases like cancer and neurodegeneration. So that's what my group studies, and that's our connection to diseases that come from the consequence of aging. I think I will pause there and will hand it over to Ronjon. Hopefully that made sense. Yeah.
Thank you. And just before Ronjon comes in, we will take about maybe 2 minutes after Ronjon has spoken to see if you are an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer, at least from those three branches, some very direct relationship and very practical input that could be given to the type of things that Geeta was talking about. And of course, I believe Ronjon is going to expand on that.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you. Do we have some slides? How does this work? Okay, it does. Great, excellent. It's great to be here. I'm not an IIT graduate, so it's great to be here with smart people. I'm an electrical engineer, but us computer scientists, we've been muscling into every field, as you know. So my background is, I've sold one company to Motorola, one to BlackBerry, one to Apple. So my reputation is starting companies and selling them to arrogant phone companies. But the last 10 years really been looking at the intersection of mathematics and medicine. There's two particular companies I've been working on recently, Superbio.ai, which is a no-code AI platform for biologists to use libraries without coding. And then Agemica, a vaccine for aging. So hold that thought. What does that mean? I have about 100 companies that I've sort of got investments in, part owner of. And I teach at Stanford University in the genetics department. Classically AI, genes and ethics, but also venture capital. And also an interesting project about, I think, as Ajit was talking about, we have bits of us that replace us, and we have gene editing. And if you start replacing bits of you, do we actually change humanity? Are we actually a different species? So there's a project at Stanford called The Boundaries of Humanity. What stops you being human? This is my venture firm, R42. We have all kinds of activities, and we invest in AI and longevity companies. That's what our fund does. But I'm really an electrical engineer, computer scientist. The field of aging, biotech, is more interdisciplinary than ever. It takes more skills, more dimensions to actually solve these problems, because these problems are very, very difficult. So it used to be, 30 years ago, it was more pure disciplines involved. At Stanford, pretty much every class you have to assume there's somebody who doesn't either know programming or doesn't know biochemistry, and you have to adapt your teaching style accordingly. But my first AI system was in 1983 at the University of Birmingham. This is an article. It's actually not 30 days old. It's actually 30 years old. And we're still talking about it. And my prediction in 30 years' time will probably still have the same cover. And I teach longevity science courses. Some of these are for Stanford students. But there are a couple of courses that anyone can take, a crash course in AI and an aging science. So if people are interested in that, those are in the evenings that anyone can take. I think they're about $300. And those people who are interested in longevity science that the Stanford students take, there's probably 100, 120 papers on the Stanford website, all different topics on aging science and the application of aging technology as you live longer, and societal issues as well. But the main intersection point here is that we've been living longer. Right now, the average age of death for American males is 78. Actually, it's dropped to 76 in the last couple of years. But 100 years ago, it was a much smaller time. If you look at the dotted line, over that time, we've had huge improvements in medicine, biotechnology, but huge improvements in computer science as well, in artificial intelligence. And we're now at an exponential level. And so I think we're at an inflection point now, whereas maybe 30 years ago, we wouldn't even be on the same panel. You'd be laughing at me, and I'd be laughing at you, saying, I'd probably be fired, actually, for just even suggesting that you can live longer. The oldest living person is actually was born in San Francisco. I have to keep updating this deck because they keep, unfortunately, changing. 115, the oldest ever living person, 122. When you triangulate various biochemistry reactions like telomeres, they get smaller and smaller. It seems to triangulate around about 120, 118 or so. And really, follow on the discussion of my previous two colleagues, aging is actually not classified as a disease. Rather, we have age-related diseases that are correlated to aging. And so the question we have to ask is there an underlying common processes that affects all the diseases all at the same time? Or is there a collection of common processes? That's what Geeta's, I'm sure, working on all the time, thinking about, can we find one thing that fixes everything all at the same time, or a collection? And what I'm throwing out there now is an aging vaccine. What does that mean? So a vaccine usually means something you're trying to strengthen your immune system. You might give a dead pathogen or a weaker pathogen, and your immune system kicks in and practices on how to address that particular disease, that particular pathogen. And so when you get it in real life, you know what to do. Your body knows what to do. That's the classical definition of a vaccine. Now, the average person, though, Wittgenstein at Cambridge said that language is defined about how you use it, not how it's originally defined, technically defined. Thinks it's something you take once a year, or once, and you don't ever get this disease ever again. And so I would say we might be able to find a vaccine. There's a concept known as senolytics. This is the Agemica company that we're working on, and saying, can we find similar pathways? And it could be the immune system, and certainly broad-spectrum immune system has something to do with it. It's that's when you get a vaccine, they always tell you if you're 6 years old or 80 years old, make sure you take the vaccine. But if you're in between, that's because when you're 80, your immune system is severely compromised. It's much, much, much weaker as you get older. Or it could be a set of drugs. And what would it do? What could you actually have? Could it actually stop aging? And could it reverse aging? That's the sort of the big idea, that even asking it, even discussing it. How would we do it? Superbio is trying to use machine learning to try and find these pathways, and then Agemica is trying to find gene expressions that correspond to lots of aging processes rather than one. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you. In the last slide that Ronjon just showed, I think you get some sense of why this session is relevant for this room. Right? So if I give the very simple-minded answers to why is this relevant, in addition to what you've already seen, let's assume you are an electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer. Think of any sequencing technology or next-gen sequencing technology that reads the gene, the DNA or the genome. Fundamentally, these are engineering problems, and they are engineering solutions. Now, if you look at, for example, CRISPR gene editing technology, which may hold key to some of the problems we've dealt with today, once again, engineers and engineering has played a lot of role in bringing these to life. Now, let's assume you are working in AI or computing or analytics of any sort, just imagine the entire cycle of drug discovery, starting from the very beginning, the mechanism of action of the disease, You can use human intuition based on your prior experience. That's one way to do it. The alternative is you can use a generative AI system to say, let me generate probable causes of or mechanisms of action, of course with that some added human intuition, so that what I do beyond that is on the right track. So I don't want to make mistakes upstream in selecting the right mechanism of action, where downstream I'll be only amplifying that mistake. So maybe Ronjon, briefly, you want to talk about stuff that people like Helix and all did and talked about in one of your events and how that relates to an audience like this?
Sure. I think one of our investments is Helix, which is founded by David Brown, who invented the most profitable drug in the history of drugs. It was called Viagra. And Viagra is often put as an example. Oh, they found it out by accident. But actually, so switch it the other way around. Instead of trying to figure out what could actually fix one disease, can we actually look at compounds and see which disease they fix instead of the other way around? And so you can use machine learning to say, well, which compounds fix which diseases? Instead of inventing new drugs, can we take the school of thought that you don't need to invent new drugs? Let's just take the 5,000 that are out there that are already approved or let some level of approval and see which ones will work with which diseases. In their particular case, they're looking at rare diseases. But you can extend that platform, that idea. So we have an investment in Rubido who's got that idea, but for aging diseases. Agemic is trying to do another spin, but for aging diseases. Rubido is trying to do a new chemical entity. Agemic is trying to do, again, existing drugs for other things.
Fantastic, thank you. So we have 3 minutes. I'm going to ask maybe one question to each of you, and the questions will be mirror image of each other. Ronjon, if you had $10 million to invest, and you could put it in one thing, what would you put that in?
Well, I do actually have $10 million to invest.
If you had an additional $10 million to invest.
We have a fund, we have a venture fund.
Of course. If you had an additional $10 million to invest.
Yeah, okay, so an additional $10 million, I think I would put it in really looking at mitochondria investments right now. Mitochondria, these energy packs in your cells, and there's a school of thought, decline, the integrity declines as you age. If you can fix your mitochondria, then everything gets fixed all at once.
If you had 100, will that change the answer?
Well, I'm more of a startup guy. My tendency would probably put it on 10 bets. So like these different causes for aging. Can we put it in 10 different things? That's it's more of a financial view.
Yep.
Take a portfolio theory, because there's only 1 in 20 chance of getting a drug out.
Yep.
So if you had 10, 100, usually you try and get a portfolio. We have different tools. As for Andrew Lowe at MIT has this view. He wants to fix medicine with finance. Not science.
Yep.
Because medicine's expensive. Why is it expensive? It's risky. Well, in finance, we have tools to deal with that. Portfolio theory. You're a venture capitalist, you know. How do you get things at different stages, different techniques that are almost opposite to each other to reduce the risk?
Of course. So I'll delete the 100 and asking you the question. If that 10 million was coming to you, Geeta, what would you?
Okay, unlike Ronjon, I do not have $10 million.
Let's assume you had the 10 million, not the additional kind, but the kind.
Yes. So I think this connects with something Ronjon said. I would put it in an interdisciplinary team that would work on reprogramming of cells that have grown old, right? And because what I didn't mention in my earlier description is that there are cells that also grow old. They senesce as you grow older. And there is a huge opportunity to revive those cells and to make them go back to their young state. So you can't make a whole old human become a young human, right? But you can take some cells from that old human and make those cells become young cells. Now, this seems simple, but it is not, right? And this is where I think something like 10 million would allow one to embrace the complexity. And this is, I think, also relates to what Ronjon was saying. You have to embrace the complexity of the problem, right? You can't keep looking for a magic bullet and say, hey, this one small molecule will do it. And how do you embrace the complexity? Through multidisciplinary teams, right? Have biochemists, biologists, computer folks, AI folks, engineers working together to say, how can we really solve this problem of reprogramming an old cell or a set of old cells to young cells. And then that will give us some real concrete clues as to how to put that in humans. So that's what I would use the 10 million for.
Thank you. Can't understate the need for appreciating and admiring and accepting the underlying complexity. So for every complex problem, there is a solution that is very simple, very clear, and wrong. And that's not what you want. Inherent complexity, where there are these very many independent variables that interact with each other in some non-orthogonal way, it's central. So we have room for one question from the audience.
Lucky one, over there. He's got one. Oh, whoever gets to the mic first.
Hi. I have a $1 billion question for Ajit.
$1 billion?
Yes.
I don't have $1 billion.
So for full disclosure for the audience, I know Ajit since last 8 years. Ajit, what is the secret or what is the cause of your happiness, your outlook, your energy? It's so sustainable in last 9 years.
So first, thank you very much for noticing that I'm a happy person. First, a serious answer, and thank you. It's an intrinsic state. So there's, in Punjabi culture, and particularly in Sikh culture, so there's no religious connotation, it's a cultural connotation, there's a word called Chardi Kala. Chardi Kala stands for rising spirits. It's either for some combination of genetics and growth and childhood and validation, etc. That spirit of Chardi Kala, I happen to have it, and that gives sort of, I also have a very happy family, and I have 2 wonderful daughters who keep me centered and chop me to pieces when they need to, which happens once a day. So all of those things play a role. The frivolous answer, I guess the hair dye I use is working well, and that allows me to present myself in a very happy form.
Thank you for giving that sustainable answer for the audience and inspiring us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you take one quick question?
Please.
So this is tied to both longevity and disease. Is it true that a 66-year-old woman with cancer will have a more aggressive cancer than an 86-year-old woman with the same cancer?
Well, around about age 80, 90, the cancer incidence is actually lower than younger people. Now, the reason it could be a genetic argument in that the people who are maybe more protective, they just die off if they actually have cancer. They don't actually get to 85. So it may not be an intrinsic thing they're doing or not doing. It could be that, but I think that's my...
Yeah, I guess I would say we need to see more data and statistics to make that claim, right? Because anecdotally, I have not seen that. But if it's anecdotal, then it's hard to make a generalization.
True. I've seen it anecdotally. That's
yeah, anecdotally, yeah. I would hesitate to generalize based on anecdotal because cancers come in a variety of forms, and the pre-existing conditions of the person are going to make a cancer either take a foothold better or not. And so there's a lot of controls you need to do to make a statement like that, in my opinion.
That's why I was asking, because
yeah.
When you get old, doesn't everything slow down, including cancers?
Not necessarily. So part of it is what we were talking about. When things are damaged, they slow down, but they're also less able to take care of things when things go wrong, right? So it's 2 things happening, and who wins, who knows, right? It depends on the person.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we go one more? I think this was a very awe-inspiring talk, and I just want to ask for everyone here, do you have any practical suggestions for...
Okay, I'll give you...
Ranjan,
I mean, you were expecting that, weren't you?
He had predicted this.
Yeah, I was on the... we should ask individually, but I was asked this on the BBC, and it made me look a little bit wacky. But I said, like, plan A, diet and exercise. Most people don't do that. Are you just doing a regular, cancelling sugar?
Lifestyle.
Doing exercise. Plan B, we try and invent a new drug, a new treatment.
Yes.
Plan C, which looks like it might be plan A, because at the rate we're going, is that you have to freeze yourself to get enough time for us to... Plan D, upload your brain into a machine. That's
and if I could give a plan A prime, sleep well.
Yes.
Eat well, sleep well.
You should go think, what do you do? Yeah, what's your 2 things? Sleep for you.
Sleep is absolutely critical.
And then what about Geeta? What do you do practically?
Kind of relates to what Ajit is, try to be happy. Because stress is a big big issue for disease, right? So find ways to be happy, to enjoy the things that give you joy. That helps me. Yeah.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think we can take time for any more questions. So.
That's lovely.
Please
Thank you.
switch this off. Oh.
Thank you, Ronjon.
Thank you so much.